Oh, there we are. Hello, I'm Jake. So my job is to work with all the people who get petitions from change.org, which is a really fun job. So all the leaders in business and government around the world who get stuff from all of our users. Before I get into that, though, the most important thing you need to know about me is that I'm addicted to visual affirmation, which means that if you don't look at me or smile at me or nod at me at least a little bit, then I think you hate me. So anything you can do to help me along the way is super appreciated. I know it's the end of the day, but this will make it a lot more fun. What we're going to talk about is the problem with petitions, which is, of course, a little bit ironic and interesting since we have a lot of petitions at change.org. But really what we're talking about is petitions as a proxy for digital democracy and how to make it better. So change.org has 1,000 petitions per day that are started on the site, and they span every conceivable issue. There are literally issues that change people's lives and save lives to really silly ones. My favorite petition of all time still was a petition to the Detroit Lions, the NFL football team, asking them not to let Nickelback play the halftime show of the Thanksgiving Day game. Everything in between. Now, what this really means is that we are essentially a form of a laboratory for looking at digital democracy, how it works, and where it can go. And the question we always ask ourselves, and this is the most important question we can answer as a company, is are these petitions actually working? And unequivocally, we can say, yes, petitions work. They work really well at a lot of different things, but they also don't work nearly as well as they can. They work about 3% of the time in our case. So I joined exactly a year ago, actually. My first day was at PDF last year. And so we've been spending the last year looking at this. One of the things that's been fun is to look at the history of petitions and actually figure out what's going on underneath it. This is a really brilliant timeline of all the major innovations that have ever happened in the history of petitions. 2 data points. One that came to the Americas roughly in the 17th century. This is from the Germantown Quaker petition against slavery. And then there was this big, huge innovation, which was to turn that offline experience into an online experience. Virtually nothing about petitions or the act of kind of doing democracy at scale has really changed a lot in that amount of time. What's also happened is we've gotten really good at scaling petitions once they went online, and now instead of just having more access, which we do have, which is great, and a lot more people who would never have the ability to make their voice heard are able to make it heard, but sometimes they're making it be heard too well. This is something we used to say at the Sunlight Foundation all the time when I worked there. We've created the biggest megaphones ever, but we've never really created the headphones to allow those voices to really be heard and understood and then to be acted on. This is the conversation that has happened. A bunch of familiar names up here. I was actually digging through old emails. There's Clay, there's Mika, Marcy Harris, Shana Englund, who presented up here about the advocacy gap a couple years ago. What all of these have really been about is identifying a lot of the problems with getting our voices, the voice of the people, into the systems of government that we need to be heard through, but that just aren't. We've identified problems really, really well. And what we spent the last year doing is actually saying, what would it take to not just identify the problems, but actually rethink this solution so we can actually build something bigger and better that is more effective. So we've come up with what we call the principles of digital democracy, which is, again, not just talking about how to get our voice in those systems that they have built on their terms, but actually think about what is going to be the most effective way to deal with the issues that people have and make voices actually heard. So the first is this. It starts with something we call the victory pipeline. This is kind of a theory of change for people who are familiar with that for change.org, which is how we move people from starting a petition to actually winning something, actually finding a solution. And what's so interesting about this is that anybody can have a personal experience. Anybody can have a concern or a cause that they care about, and they can start a petition, they can get signatures, and we've done that incredibly well. A lot of people, I shouldn't say not all of us, a lot of people in here have done that incredibly well. But we've almost never built a system that really allows for the engagement of the people who are receiving this, which is it's tragic because it's actually required. You can't move down this pipeline without that engagement. It is actually literally impossible to win unless the person you need to make a decision says they will do that. So what we kind of sum this up as is we need people to be able to work with those leaders and allow them into the process of participation, not just at them. So we need to work with, not at. That's principle one. The second is we need to go ahead and just accept that we're not living in a world where government is the only type of place where democracy matters. A lot of people do this in this room, but this is something we need to take and scale further. I don't know if Taryn Steinberger Kaufman is here, but people like Taryn and others who are doing amazing corporate campaigning, we need to basically just go ahead and say corporations and companies have as much impact in our lives as government, and then we just need to make that part of the democratic process and just build it in. We also need to stop thinking about government as just being US federal Congress. When we talk about things that are broken, we always talk about Congress. But we need to be thinking about all government and all electeds that represent us at scale. I keep saying at scale. It's like a buzz. I think somebody said it earlier, and I can't stop saying it. This is one of my favorite quotes of hundreds of interviews that we've done with the people who receive petitions, again, in Congress, in city halls, in companies. What if it didn't totally suck? Just let's start with that. What if it didn't totally suck? And the principle here is that we should make it possible, at least, for there to be a positive experience. That if you're going to engage as a decision maker, you're going to work towards a solution, you really want to, that you should be able to be even rewarded for that. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't put tremendous pressure, and in some cases, a lot of pressure on the people to respond, that we don't throw away the stick. But we need to actually include the carrot. This shouldn't be just an antagonistic relationship. We should make it possible for people to be rewarded, especially decision makers. The other piece, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and a lot of folks here have as well, making government transparent, making corporations transparent, making things like campaign contributions and lobbying transparent, but we actually haven't spent very much time at all making our own advocacy transparent. And if you think about making a phone call to a member of Congress or making a phone call to Comcast, which is the worst experience ever, the only person that knows that you have made that call is you and the person on the receiving end of the line, who's usually a low-paid, low-trained young person who is just trying to get through the day. This is not a good way to execute democracy on massive level instead of scale. So what we want to be able to do is get that surfaced into the public's knowledge so that when 500 people call in about the exact same thing, all 500 people can know about it, but also a journalist can know about it, also a blogger can know about it and say, hey, 500 people in the same neighborhood are calling Comcast about the same darn thing. Why isn't Comcast doing something about it? Or 500 people in this city or this district. Putting things online and doing them through petitions is a really good way to do that in particular. The fifth principle is we, the people, I put we in quotations there, are just not always right. We need to let that one go. The idea that if you start a petition or if that you are raising your voice, that it is fundamentally righteous or that you are actually accurate in what you need is something that a lot of people hold and we need to let go. It's an ethos that just needs to change. One of my favorite examples of this working in our experiment so far is this petition to the Red Cross. The petition was to ask that the Red Cross would allow gay men to donate blood. And the Red Cross, the chief medical officer of the Red Cross, responded and said, we think that's great, and we totally agree. This petition is not necessary. In fact, we would love to support you. It's just not our decision. This is a US FDA decision. The Food and Drug Administration made this decision in the 80s. And so now the petition starter, somebody who's working on this, has more information, they're going to be better targeted, and they've got an ally with a link that they can share saying the chief medical officer of the Red Cross wants to see this happening too. This is just a fun one. Jimmy Wales, who's I don't think here this year, but sometimes just having a recourse to say that this is a ridiculous petition. About 10,000 people signed this petition on the right to Jimmy Wales with Wikipedia about a topic that they wanted to see, and he called them lunatic charlatans, I believe. I don't know if he's right or wrong. I don't know these people, although if you want to hear a fun story, ask Dave Karp about this petition if he's here. He's got a great background on this one. The other and maybe most important principle here is to bring them out. We've spent years, at least a decade, trying to figure out how to make voices matter inside the systems that somebody else has built, and creating expectations for citizens that they should understand how Congress works, or that they should understand the management structure of a company. Facebook and Twitter and others have done a tremendous job of actually getting those same people out and using the platforms that we are using already. And now we need to apply that same thing to our democratic tools. We need them to be where we are, not putting us more into where they are. This is a helpful reminder. If anybody needs a one-pager, you can take this home. You got it? You good? Okay. So turning these principles into something tangible and actually useful in a product is what we've also been spending a good bit of time on and would love anybody's help, any of the systems that are out there working on these things. The Yelp of decision makers is kind of shorthand for one of the ways we're thinking about this, which is that if you want to find what is going on with a decision maker who represents you in elected office or a company that might have an impact on your town, you want to be able to see all the things that people want to talk to them about and either be able to join those other things or raise something new. And you want to be able to do it transparently and fast. So in the same way you do a Google search and you get a Wikipedia page, you maybe get the elected official's campaign page, you get a company page, we also want to be able to surface these petitions in an aggregated format so you can do that. The other piece is this idea of direct response democracy. So what I mean by that is when people have responded traditionally, let's say a couple years ago, in an example recently, the mayor's office of San Francisco, Ed Lee, described how they normally do this. And they'd get a petition, they'd want to respond, they write a press release, which is, by the way, like the worst form of response to anything. Maybe not, that press release would get picked up, and even in the most perfect case, it would be like A1 San Francisco Chronicle. No one who signed that petition probably read it. The people who wanted to have this conversation weren't even allowed to be part of the response. So we need that to be part of our systems. And much more importantly, actually, is the response to the response. The White House has built a tool recently called We the People, not recently, I guess 2 years ago now, 3 years ago. But the biggest flaw there is that it doesn't allow you to continue to organize. If the response you get from the president's office is not satisfactory to you, you can do nothing else. You've organized 100,000 people, and now you can't do anything because you got a response. That was all they promised you. We need people to be able to continue to do that. I'm going to skip that one real quick. So this is some of our tests, which I think you guys will find fun. This is Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Senator of New York. This is a great example of her being able to work with petition starters and not just be on the receiving end as they yell at her. Because they weren't yelling at her. They wanted justice in the military around sexual trauma victims. And she was able to respond twice and basically say, I'm totally with you, and also help me here. I'm trying to do something to help you. You can help me by getting more involved. This is Louis Gohmert, Texas 1, not exactly a traditionally digitally savvy member of Congress, but the media was able to find a petition to him and identify that this is something that he should be responding to because the petitions thing was part of his, in his district. And here's Mitch McConnell, not always the most loved member of Congress, but what's great about this is he wrote a response to the ABLE Act, something that deals with disabilities, and people just thanked him. This is a really important part of the democratic process that we often leave out, and none of our systems are really allowing for. The basic act of saying thank you and making a positive experience possible. LinkedIn, another great example of actually building a product as a result of a petition, actually saying this is a great idea, thank you for giving us this option to do this. We hadn't even known this was an issue, and it's just helpful to get your petition, and now we can do something about it. Southwest Airlines didn't actually do the thing that people wanted to do, but they said, we hear you, which is another critically important thing, and we don't allow for it in our current systems. And quickly, one of my favorites is IKEA, who was asked to pull out of their sponsorship of the Sochi Olympics, and they didn't pull out, but what they did do is they said, well, the reason they were going to be, they were being asked to pull their sponsorship from the Olympics was the anti-LGBT laws in Russia. And so what they said was, we actually love and support our LGBT staff and our LGBT customers, and we think it's more important to espouse those values by being a sponsor at the Olympics than it is to pull out. And so it might not be the exact thing that people wanted, but it allowed for a conversation around a really important issue. And here's some things that we'd love to get your help on, and I'll be done in just a second. We need data. We need a lot of data. Google and the Sunlight Foundation and NOI have been fantastic at this. We need a lot more. We need company data. We need more elected official data around the world, and we'd love to work with anybody there. We need an ethos of moving from petitions to conversations that is pervasive across all of our work, because the expectations of all these decision makers is not just dictated by any one site, it's dictated by all of us. And 3, this idea of being addicted to civic engagement. My favorite thing to talk about with Ben Berkowitz is the idea that potholes are the gateway drug to civic engagement, because it's totally true. And we need more of that. All the energy that we'd put to people sharing photos or their comments, whatever it might be, we need to be brought into our democracy. There we go. Well, I'll finish. Final thought is, digital democracy is a lot like a factory of our own making. My dad ran a factory in Tennessee, and he always said if there's a problem with the factory, the answer is not to put more materials into the factory. It's not to put more resources in the factory. You need to rebuild or retool the factory. And right now, we've built a factory that doesn't quite work as well as it needs to. A lot of us have. We've all made this democracy factory. And we need to build it, rebuild it together, build a new one together that allows for the materials of citizenry to be put to best use. Thank you.